Welcome to another installment of The Goddess Keys, where we merge fact and fiction and we build our lives through the gray area of imagination and magic. And on today's episode, we're going to continue our chat around different archetypes and embodying these archetypes to create the world that you want to see. So many times we can get caught up in thinking of the Matrix as this really big oppressive force that just seems like every time we try to get ahead, something happens, right? To make life feel a little bit more difficult. In an ideal world, you would want to make certain changes, but when you're living life, like these changes sometimes feel impossible. Okay, so we want to kind of focus in on that impossibility. And in order to shift the impossible to the possible, what it means is us trying on different archetypes that maybe we felt ostracized by or even rejected by. And you want to actually work on becoming those archetypes, because it's those archetypes that gave you the most issues that a lot of times you have the most to learn from. So in this series, I'm going to be focusing on the archetypes that maybe aren't as popular to think about when we think about different roles that we can play in life. And so today I want to discuss the Emperor, all right? And especially if you identify as a feminine, sometimes you maybe weren't taught to embody the role of the Emperor in your life, okay? And if that is you, if you have been somebody where you've seen the Emperor as being outside of yourself, you've seen the power or the strategy as being outside of yourself, then this is definitely a chat for you. Okay, because one thing that I've been reiterating, this came up a lot this week. So first in the Spiral Sound Lab and then in some of my one-on-one sessions this week. And I really want to just deliver this message to the collective for whoever needs to hear it, because you hear me talk a lot about world building and the power of the imagination and how it's our imagination, our unfiltered, unobstructed imagination, which can get us out of any scenario or write us into any new scenario. Okay, but our imagination needs to have the space to thrive. And there's so many ways our society has been built upon the throttling of the imagination. But the imagination is, and having the audacity to put yourself into certain archetypes is what supports you with building your world and making it larger. Because something that I really want to reiterate to anybody who is attracted to this content on the Goddess Keys, and also welcome. Thank you for being here, whether it's your first time or whether you've been on this journey with me for a while. Wherever our paths are crossing right now, I just want to say hello and thank you for being here. And I appreciate you. And whatever way you support, whether that's sharing the video or purchasing my book or rocking with me on Patreon or Bandcamp, whatever, I just also want to thank you. I appreciate everybody who comes into my path. I believe that every interaction is sacred and there's a meaning, a deeper meaning behind it. So thank you for the folks who have been with me on this path. But one thing that's been coming up this week is it's not enough to decide that you want to change your avatar, that you have been playing a certain role in the simulation that has not been joyful for you, that has not been helpful for you. Okay, that's just been a broken record for you. So you decide that you want to change your position. Well, when you make that decision, and this is where a lot of people trip up, when you make that decision, you kind of need to go all in when you make that decision, okay? Because here's what happens. So let's think about things from the role of an engineer. Okay, this is going to get into our topic around the Emperor. The Emperor has some engineering capabilities that I think are important to highlight as well. But if we were to think about life from an engineering kind of perspective, an engineer is not just focused on one particular life, right? They have many different scripts running, and the main goal is for the world to run a certain way for them. You know, the engineer has a very specific vision for life and for the world, and they will design things to fit that vision. If you decide to become, to transition from being non-playing character, right, to being somebody who's driving your world, okay, if you decide to make that decision, it's not enough for you to say, okay, I wake up, I want something different. You also need to build the something different. You need to be the emperor of your world. You need to build your world. This is where people trip up, is they are feeling dissatisfied with their lives. They're feeling like something needs to shift. But then when the mechanics come into like building the structures for the life, this life of theirs that they're building, this is where people get scared. It's not like the algorithm of the matrix is just going to all of a sudden bend for you to have the world of your dreams exactly. You will find that there's going to be help on the way, especially if you're somebody who's like really looking to self-actualize. You are going to find different helping nudges, right, as you're doing this. So that is something you will find help. It's not to say that you're all alone, but what it is to say is that you need to build a place for yourself to thrive. This is why sometimes there's issues with folks who, quote, wake up or who go on a spiritual journey, but they feel like they're not actually able to thrive financially or structurally, because a lot of times there's not a place that's built in the simulation for people who are, quote, waking up to thrive, because if you wake up too much, then you're not going to go based upon whatever the master plan is that you may have been designed for. Okay, you're doing your own thing now. So that's a huge responsibility that you take on. You become the commander of your life. You become the emperor of your life, and you must be comfortable with wearing the shoes of the emperor. And if you're not, that's okay. So start with whatever issues you might have with authority. Sometimes you might need to go through certain authority issues that you have. You might have negative leanings towards authority. You would need to deprogram that if you're going to be the authority of your life, because then you're going to be fighting yourself. If you have issues with authority, then issues with authority is going to show up in your life, and then it's going to be you who's the authority. So you're going to find that you get into a you versus you kind of scenario. Okay. So that's something to watch out for. And, if you have felt harmed or hurt by authority figures, make peace with that. Spend a week doing what you need to do to tie up loose ends, to write letters of, how you felt, or to write, burn, and release. Like, do whatever you need to do to make peace with those stories. But at some point, you need to also just cut things off and not get too caught up in your feelings. You kind of need to, as you're wearing the shoes of the emperor, you need to be looking at life from the big picture. Okay. And so structurally, if you keep focusing on what happened to you, what other people did to you, it's going to keep you on that same loop. And a lot of times that's why certain stories are running or certain scripts are running in your life, because they do such a great job at crippling or debilitating you from making any seismic shifts in your world. Okay. So it's okay to mourn. It's okay to be in your emotions. But when you're wearing the hat of the emperor, that has a time frame on it. Okay. And then you also you need to be thinking about the bigger picture. If you are looking to get into this energy, more of this world building energy, I do have some spiral sounds that I've released on Bandcamp specifically for this. If Shakespeare was right and all the world is a stage, then you being the emperor of your life means that you would need to study the emperor. Okay. So then you would also want to learn what you can about emperors. Okay. But see them as you studying for a part. Okay. So you don't just see yourself outside of the people that you study. You bring those people into your world. Okay. Because the power of the subconscious mind is when we watch any kind of media, the reason why media is so influential for us. When we watch any kind of media, our subconscious mind can't tell the difference of it actually happening to us or us watching this story about somebody else. So you might as well just go full throttle and become that character because it's already happening for you subconsciously anyway. You know, a lot of people would say, oh, don't watch TV or don't watch movies. And I've definitely been in that space where I've just not watched any TV or movies. And then I've also been on the opposite end of the spectrum. And I find, you know, as long as you're doing it consciously. So if you're going to watch a movie, know that an initiation is happening, a program is happening that which has been scripted for that movie. Outside of the script of the movie, there's a whole bunch of symbolism that you might be initiating into if you watch that movie. But you set the intention to initiate yourself, right? To go and work through a certain part of your subconscious that needs to be worked through. And if you set your intention with that movie, you'll get a lot more out of it. And then you don't have to like go through this guilt around watching TV or being corrupted by the media because, you know, these tools are all around us anyways, being used, quote unquote, against us. So just kind of knowing that and you making the boss move to be like, this particular media, I don't care what it was designed for. When I watch it, it's going to do X, Y, or Z for me, you know, and you set your intention. So yeah, that's just like a random afterthought that I just kind of wanted to put in because some of the pushback I might get from this content, because I refer different movies or different shows, and, you know, you might be somebody who doesn't watch TV or media. You know, for people who want to watch media or TV a little bit more consciously, it can be utilized as a really powerful deprogramming tool, actually. So anyways, I wanted to give two examples of the Emperor archetype, okay? One is a little bit more common, I think, but one might be a little odd, okay? But both of these characters, one was supposed to be real, and then one is a fictional character from the Marvel universe, okay? Or the Marvel verse. I don't know how they say it. So let's start with the Marvel one first. So the first character that brings that Emperor archetype out is the Scarlet Witch from the multiverse. Well, actually, I'm going to talk, before I talk about her character from Doctor Strange, the Multiverse of Madness, I actually think that I mean the Scarlet, like more so the development of the Scarlet Witch in that show, Wanda's World. Okay. So there's a show, Wanda's World, which basically shows how Wanda, who is somebody who has supernatural powers. She's somebody who has supernatural powers. She's a nexus being, and her specialty is the ability to utilize hex magic. And so the hexagram, that's like a very Saturnian magic. And, you know, if you think about hex magic, if you think about like a hex or a hexagram, a shape that moves into that would be the shape of a honeycomb, right? If you look at a honeycomb or a beehive, you just see like a whole bunch of different hexagrams, okay? And so who operates that hive? It's usually the queen bee. And, you know, the queen bee is basically able to communicate with the hive non-verbally, okay? And so one thing that we see with Wanda's powers as a nexus being is she's basically able to create her reality or to create her world. And she can unwittingly, in the show, she basically is holding a whole bunch of people hostage in her imagination. She experiences a traumatic experience where her husband passes away, and she's grieving so much for her husband who passed away that she conjures him up again in another realm, because as a nexus being, she's able to do that. So she doesn't know that she's creating a world, but through her trauma and through her power, she creates this world. And she actually utilizes TV shows, because she watched a lot of TV shows as she was being raised. And so there's these TV shows that made an impact on her life. And she, as she's creating this world through trauma, she's actually living out this world through different TV shows too. So if we think about it, watching TV is supposed to be a very passive experience, right? Like, you're not really supposed to be acting out things as you watch TV. You're supposed to be a passive observer. But Wanda, as a Nexus being, she actually does something really interesting with television, and she creates through the memories of the television experiences that she's had. And she becomes these characters and uses this imagery to build her world. Okay. And so there's these really interesting moments in the show Wanda's World where the actors kind of slip up. You see that things are actually all being orchestrated, but Wanda has no idea that she's holding these people against their will, basically, because her mind is so strong. Her world building capabilities are so strong that whoever's in her orbit needs to do her bidding. And so she takes on this energy of Queen Bee. All right. Queen of the hive. Okay. Like, the drones in the hive have no choice but to listen to the Queen Bee. Her power is irresistible, okay, because it's programmed that way. So that hex magic, that hexagram magic, that's like a hive. There's also a hive element to it, okay? So that's the first example of an emperor. And if you think about the Scarlet Witch, for folks who have seen Doctor Strange's Multiverse of Madness, she is the villain, okay? And you can see that she's using a lot of like Saturnian hex magic in that particular movie as well. She uses a lot of sigils. Okay. Sigils are also a big form of Saturnian magic, but she also uses her hands a lot. You see her conjuring power through her hands and her mind as well. So very mercurial as well. And basically, a lot of her creation is happening in meditation as she's connecting with the hive, and she's able to change events with her pure intention alone. And she becomes a villain in the Multiverse of Madness and in Wanda's World, because she wants a very specific world. And a lot of that has to do with her children. While she was in this world of pain after grieving her husband's death, she not only conjured her husband, but she also conjured children. She birthed children during this time when she was creating a world out of grief. And she ended up becoming a villain in other forms of media because she wanted to be back with her children. She found out that she was defying the laws of the universe by like creating these children, and she didn't understand why she couldn't be with her children. Even if they were figments of her imagination, they still felt real to her. So there was that interesting tension as well. And we see this tension play out in the story, the Gnostic story of Sophia. Sophia gets a lot of flack for basically creating. She created things that she supposedly wasn't supposed to create. They actually were children, and she was punished for that. And it was seen as like a cautionary tale of, this is why you got to be careful with what women create. It's like a cautionary tale about women and creation, and like why they might need guardianship or custodianship in order to create, because if that doesn't happen, then chaos happens. There needs to be a reasonable voice, a reasonable presence when a woman is creating. So you kind of see that interesting energy as well. Like the Scarlet Witch is a very powerful being, but she's also seen as very like mentally disturbed. And, this is a cautionary tale of what happens when somebody who hasn't processed their trauma has this sort of unchecked power. Okay. That being said, the Scarlet Witch, or Wanda, she does create a world. She does have the ability to be the emperor of her reality, and her power is so strong that she's able to will things that maybe defy universal laws into being. So the interesting question becomes, at what point is that quote right, and at what point is that quote wrong? So that's the first person who exhibits the Emperor archetype that I wanted to share in this conversation. And I also want to share one more. So this is more of a traditional emperor archetype. We're going to talk about King Solomon and the building and construction of Solomon's temple. So King Solomon basically was able to be super rich and super powerful and create a super large and opulent temple because he bound all of the elements. He bound all of the jinn, all of the daemons, like all the angels, just like everything, all the magical stuff. He bound it together through something called the Seals of Solomon. Solomon's seal is, well, first of all, it's a plant. It's a Saturnian plant. Okay, it's used in binding magic. So once again, we have this theme of Saturn happening with the Emperor. The Emperor is also the fourth card in the tarot deck. And number 4, that's a foundation. That is definitely a number of construction, the number of a master builder, very Masonic kind of number as well. Okay, so it is, a lot of times the Emperor can also represent a certain type of structure being built, because there's a certain agenda, right, for people who sometimes have power and sometimes people who don't have power. But in this case, King Solomon was given basically unrestricted power with the help of the angels. I believe it was Archangel Michael. And basically with the help of the angels, he was able to bind all powers and to create his empire. But, even though he's also using hex magic and bound a lot of magical creatures and energies that didn't want to be bound, but once he was able to bind them, he was basically able to get them to do whatever he wanted. So here's another case of somebody who's creating rulership, who is making people do things against their will in order for him to build his world. But he's celebrated as being a hero, and he even gets the permission from the angels, right, in order to bind the will of others. Okay, so in you're seeing very similar types of magic. The hex magic, that Saturnian hex magic, utilizing the hexagram to bind a certain world. And, you're seeing that first with the Scarlet Witch and that show Wanda's World, and then also with King Solomon as well, and him binding the elemental realms, the jinn, and whatnot. And so these are 2 examples of the Emperor, people who don't ask for permission before creating. And there's issues with perception. Is the Emperor somebody who is to be celebrated, or is the Emperor somebody to be feared? Or maybe it's both. Maybe it's not an either or. But sometimes, when you are playing Emperor in your world, you now need to make the tough decisions. So it's really easy to blame people in leadership for things, right? But what about when it's your time? when it's your turn to make very specific decisions. And you no longer have the excuse of, well, I don't have the power to do that, right? But what if you claim that power? If you claim yourself as emperor of your world, now what? Then things aren't as cookie cutter, right? And sometimes you're going to be making certain decisions that other people aren't going to like, but you're doing it to build your world. Okay. So the emperor is a little bit more calculated. The emperor looks at the long term things. Okay. The emperor, though, can also create through emotion. So the Scarlet Witch, she built her world because of emotions or love that she felt for her children and wanting to be with her children. And she became a villain because her desire to be with her children was so strong that she wasn't going to let anything or anybody stop her from that, So the emperor isn't always cold-hearted, but sometimes an emperor, their desires can wash out the desires of other people. The world builder overrules, the majority a lot of times. So it's a nuanced sort of energy, and it's something, especially if you've had issues with authority, or you're looking to take on more positions of authority in your realm. This is an energy that you want to become really familiar with and comfortable with in your world building journey. Because if you're serious about creating the world that you're dreaming of, right? If you're really actually serious about materializing that, then it's also an issue around strategy and being audacious, right? To being bold and audacious enough to think differently and to act differently. And this is why we utilize these archetypes, because they can kind of help us to do that. They create templates for us to try on. And then we create our own archetypes as well. But we want to start off with some archetypes that have already been presented in our world and look at how we identify with those too. And I also just want to note that I have the Autumn Passageway open currently. And this is an opportunity to work with me one-on-one at a reduced rate. So I'm currently recruiting for 1 month packages, 3-month packages, and 12-month packages where we take a gamified quest together to solve a particular issue that's happening in your world, to level up on a certain issue that's happening in your world, to eradicate a certain blockage that's happening in your world. We do this through imagination, technomancy, world building, scripting. We take a lot of the stuff that's utilized usually to create art, and we utilize these tools to craft our life, because that's really the biggest masterpiece that we'll ever work on is our life. All right. And so we dare to be bold. We dare to imagine. If you are somebody who has a particular vision for your world, but you're having issues or blockages as it relates to creativity or imagination, but you know that it's there, you have a desire to create, or these are the sort of folks that I'm interested in working with, because we're all creative, we're all artists. The more art you're able to express, then the more the more autonomy that you actually end up having within your life. So if you are interested, then we can set up some time to chat. You can send me an email at contact@heatheramunet.io, contact@heatheramunet.io, and we can have a chat, see if we're a good fit. You can ask me whatever questions are coming up, and I hope to be able to work with you. And sending you lots of love, joy, and peace until we meet again. Bye.